Hello, I'm Alan Malik with Patient Tools, and I wanted to run through a real quick demo on how to use the estimator here and maybe give you a little background and maybe help you get some better results out of it. So real simple, first thing here is just figure out what time frame or what period you want to use for these. Go into here, you can sit back and go, okay, what kind of screening level are we looking at? 5,000, 10,000, whatever it is going to be per year in this particular case. Then figure out what percentage of your screenings are going to be done remotely versus what are going to be done inside the office. And so just to start out, you can do it at 50%, but if you're doing everything inside the office, you put it down to 0%. If you want it 100% outside the office, then flip it over to 100%. But just for a number, you throw it in there. And then finally you get down here to inside your screening interview, you need to kind of get an idea of how many different measures you're going to be doing, what combination of measures you're going to be into, and then over here under these license sort of items over here, if you start adding those into the mix, then you can start seeing like over here where we have the vendor license fees and so forth start coming through. So it's whatever combination of those sorts of things that you think you're going to end up doing. And then, so now, basically, once you click those things off and say what you're going to do inside, so maybe doing ASQ3 and ASQSE, you end up with what are your costs for just straight paper and printing and so forth? What are your remote screening costs going to be? I think in this case you're kind of assuming you're mailing them out because your remote processing cost down here is set at 70 cents, but we'll get into how to modify that a little more in a minute here. And then here's all your labor, which a bunch of assumptions down here we can tune in a minute. And then the total amount of hours that was spent working on this is, for paper versus electronic. And then you actually get down to here's what patient tools fees are going to be. This is what the vendor fees are. These all, in this particular case, because we're using ASQ3 and the ASQSE2, those are all being paid to Brooks Publishing. And you can see those are about 50 cents per screen as far as the ASQ3 versus the ASQSE2. So anyway, you end up with your total cost of doing it on paper and then your total cost of doing it electronically and so forth. And then you can see the difference over here. So we basically show that the extra cost of using paper, which is really your savings in this situation. But in general, you'll see that, if you actually do reasonable estimates of what the time and labor associated with the process is, you'll find that most of the time it's more expensive to use paper. And then just to add a few more little pieces in here, we can go back and say, okay, what are your one-time startup costs? So, 5,000 is kind of large if you're just doing on-demand sort of things. Maybe it's more like a couple $100 or whatever. Or if you're doing an EMR integration, maybe it's, something like $10,000 or whatever. And then if you're doing that, then you need to get into what is your average rate of reimbursement. So, typically Medicaid, you can get like at least $7. It's kind of one of your lower levels, but, you can sit back and say, I'm only getting $2 per, and sit back and say, okay, what is my annual revenue off of that? And what is my return on investment? Well, it's going to take you about 2 years to pay off that $10,000 there. More realistically, put it up at 7, then you're making $55,000 net revenue per year. And then down here, it's only taking 0.2 years to have a positive ROI out of the situation. So just real quick and easy to be able to just use these 5 plus clicking off which screens you're going to use. You can flip this over pretty easily and say, oh, I'm going to do like a PHQ-9. Let's say I was going to do an SBIRT sort of protocol, so I'll do an audit with a DAS sort of thing. And then those are your numbers coming out there. But once again, you're still making good money as long as you're getting that reimbursement and so forth. You can turn around and just set these to 0 and say you get no reimbursement. So your costs are about $5,000 a year, but you're doing 10,000 interviews, which isn't really bad. And you're still saving over paper. You're saving like $7,600 over paper and so forth. So anyway, then to get on to some of the, if you want to tune things in a little bit, some of the assumptions that were done up above here were basically saying the paper and the printing, different depending on which situations you're in and so forth. So maybe it's something smaller, maybe it's something larger. Maybe you're remote printing, or you're not really sending things off. Maybe you can say it's like you got some other mechanism where you can electronically gather it or something, but you're not using postage or anything like that. So, put it down to 10 cents. What's the cost per, measure in terms of the amount of time it takes to score? So you're scoring a PHQ-9, an audit, and a DAST here. So you have three things that you're scoring, so it should be about 36 seconds total. Maybe you think your folks are faster on average and so forth, so knock it down to 10 seconds. And then what do you need for the data entry? So you're going to have to take that stuff and put it into your EMR or whatever you're going to do with the information. And maybe you say that's only 10 seconds or something like that. And so maybe you think that's a more realistic view of what you're doing. But you're still, if you're just doing those three, you're still showing you're spending a lot on paper and a lot on labor, and you still got a lot of hours tied up in it, where if you're doing electronically, you would just walk away with a $5,000 bill, and your return on investment still comes around. And then finally, you really need to think about things. If you're really getting serious about how you're tuning this up, you should look at, there's scoring error associated with these things. We did a study, this follow-up like in a Head Start program, where all they were doing was like an ASQSE. So all they really had to do was get into the right age group and then score the thing appropriately. And they were still doing 30% of the time they were having scoring errors. If you're doing something like the ASQ3, well, you got 5 dimensions there that you're doing instead of just the one. Plus, you have to figure out prematurity on those and so forth. So the scoring error with the ASQ3 may even be higher than that. So, what is the cost associated with that? So if you're being realistic, maybe you'd want to add something in there for that sort of thing. And then the other one that we get into all the time with people is, if you're doing something simple, like let's say you're just doing a PHQ-9 over here, but the PHQ-9 actually has 12% false positive. So right off the bat, 12% of the time, you have to have a provider follow up on the fact that the screen came in positive. There's also, anytime those screens come up, you want to, basically if you're just detecting, you need to go in and figure out what's really going on. So what you really want is a greater depth of information. So maybe you want to know about PTSD, you want to do a little measure of mania, you want to know what other things are going on, anxiety and so forth. And so the provider is going to have to go find all those sorts of things when a screening comes up. And so what is that provider's time? And if you start thinking about things like PHQ-9, where you're just triggering stuff and you have to do like a psych workup, maybe you only do it, in a lot of cases we're showing 30-40% of the time that you're going to be triggering things. That's a lot of time. And so maybe you're 3 minutes on average is your provider requirement. And so now you start seeing your burden, your labor and so forth jumping up dramatically when you start adding those sorts of things in, when you start thinking about them. So just if you really want to be realistic about your costs, you might want to look at those pieces down there under tuning and so forth. But in any event, whatever makes the most sense for you, there's a lot of options down here to tune it up. But in general, what you're going to find is even without reimbursement, you're still doing way better using electronic over paper. And if you can get any sort of reimbursement at all, it's very simple to be able to show that you have a positive ROI very quickly. And it doesn't really matter what your setup costs are for interfacing with your EMR and so forth. You chew those up pretty quickly. So just a number of things to think about. But yeah, you can, bottom line, this whole thing, most of the places where we have electronic screening, especially if we get some level of automation, especially in EMR integration and so forth, they look at screening as a profit center. It's very easy to make money off of screening and pay for itself. So anyway, that's our quick explanation and demo, and thank you very much for your time.